empty days, there's only a spark to light my way. I wanna give out, I wanna give in. This is our crime, this is our sin, but I still believe, I still believe. Through the pain and through the grief, through the lives, through the storms, through the cries, and through the wars, oh, I still believe. Out at sea, hoping these waves don't cover me. I'm turned and tossed upon the waves. When the darkness comes, I feel the grave, but I still believe, I still believe. Through the cold and through the heat, through the rain and through the tears, through the crowds and through the cheers, oh, I still believe. I'll march this road, I'll climb this hill, upon my knees if I have to. I'll take my place upon this stage. I'll wait till the end of time for you like everybody else. Woo! I'm out on my own, walking the streets, looking at faces that I meet. I feel like I want to go home. What do I feel? What do I know? But I still believe, I still believe. Through the shame and through the grief, through the heartache and through the tears, through the waiting and through the years, for people like us in places like this, we need all the hope that we can get. Oh, I still believe. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, Seth. Let's get the call going with my good friend and co-host, Rick, and we can get this started. Hello there.
Hello there.
So, um, what do you have planned for today's discussion?
Today I'll be covering Papal Infallibility.
Oh, that should be interesting.
Oh, it'll be a fun one. Alright, since I typically go first, so I'll just get this on the roll. Alright, so, here's how it goes. So, the Church's teachings on Papal Infallibility is one that is greatly misunderstood by those inside the Church. In particular, fundamentalists and other Bible questions often confuse the charism of papal infallibility with impeccability. And I put these parts in quotes. They imagine Catholics believe the Pope cannot sin. Others, who avoid this elementary blunder, think the Pope relies on some sort of amulet or magical incarnation when an infallible definition is due. Given these common misapprehensions regarding the basic tenets of papal infallibility, it is necessary to explain exactly what infallibility is not. Infallibility is not the absence of sin, nor is it a charism that belongs only to the Pope. Indeed, infallibility also belongs to the body of bishops as a whole when, in doctrinal union with the Pope, they solemnly teach a doctrine as true. We have this from Jesus himself, who promised the apostles and their successors, the bishops, the magisterium of the church, quote, "He who hears you, hears me." This is from Luke chapter 10, verse 16. That's just a basic introduction, and now we're going to go to Vatican II's explanation. For those who don't know, this is the Second Vatican Council, happened in the early mid 1960s. Just brief summary there. Now, here we go. Vatican II explained the doctrine of infallibility as follows, quote, "Although the individual bishops do not enjoy the prerogative of infallibility, they can nevertheless proclaim Christ's doctrine infallibly. This is so, even when they are dispersed around the world, provided that while maintaining the bond of unity among themselves and with Peter's successor, and while teaching authentically on a matter of faith and morals, they concur in a single viewpoint as the one which must be held conclusively. This authority is even more clearly verified when, gathered together in ecumenical council, they are teachers and judges of faith and morals for the universal church. Their definitions must then be adhered to with the submission of faith." This is from Lumen Gentium, chapter 25. Infallibility belongs in a special way to the Pope as head of the bishops. As Vatican II remarked, it is a charism the Pope enjoys in virtue of his office, quote, "when, as the supreme shepherd and teacher of all the faithful, who confirms his brethren in their faith, he proclaims by a definitive act some doctrine of faith and morals. Therefore, his definitions of themselves are not from the consent of the Church, are justly held in irreformable, for they are pronounced with the assistance of the Holy Spirit, and assistance promised to him in Blessed Peter. The infallibility of the Pope is not a doctrine that suddenly appeared in the Church teaching, i.e., we didn't make it up. Rather, it is a doctrine that was implicit in the early Church. It is only our understanding of infallibility that has developed and been more clearly understood over time. In fact, the doctrine of infallibility is implicit in these present texts. See John chapter 21, verse 15-17, "Feed my sheep." Luke 22:32, "I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail." This is when when Jesus is talking to Peter about the path that he's called him on. And then finally, Matthew 16:18, "You are Peter." This is actually the famous speech in which Jesus declares Peter to be the rock on which he shall build his church. I think I talked about that briefly a few weeks ago, but just want to briefly recap there. Now, another section here. Christ's mandate. Christ instructed the church to preach everything he taught. This is in Matthew 28, verses 19-20, and promised the protection of the Holy Spirit to guide you into all the truth. There we go. John 16:13. That mandate and that promise guarantee the church will never fall away from his teachings. This is Matthew 16:18 and 1 Timothy 3:15, even if individual Catholics might. What that means is that while there might be certain individuals who call themselves Catholic, they might deviate from church teachings, the core teachings of the church, what the church professes to be true, that part does not change. Just a fair point there. Now, as Christians begin to more clearly understand the teaching authority of the church and the primacy of the Pope, they developed a clearer understanding of the Pope's infallibility. This development of the faithful's understanding has its clear beginnings in the early church. St. Augustine succinctly, that's a new one, succinctly captured the ancient attitude, which he remarked, quote, Rome has spoken. The case is concluded. This is from Sermons 131:10. More on Augustine in a bit. And here now there's some further clarifications. I know we covered a lot so far, but I want to add some more context to make sure it is as clear as humanly possible. An infallible pronouncement, whether made by the Pope alone or by an ecumenical council, usually is made only when some doctrine has been called into question. Most doctrines have never been doubted by the large majority of Catholics. That was true back in the days of the early church, and in many cases true even to this day. Pick up a catechism and look at the great number of doctrines, most of which have never been formally defined. But many points have been defined, and not just by the Pope alone. There are, in fact, many major topics on which it will be impossible for a Pope to make an infallible definition without duplicating one or more infallible pronouncements from ecumenical councils or the ordinary magisterium or teaching authority of the Church. At least the outline, if not the references, of the preceding paragraphs should be familiar to literate Catholics to whom this subject should appear straightforward. It is a different story with Bible Christians. For them, papal infallibility often seems a muddle because their idea of what it encompasses is often incorrect. Some ask how popes can be infallible if some of them live scandalously. They committed sin or made some mistake, what have you. This objection, of course, illustrates the common confusion between infallibility and impeccability. There is no guarantee that popes won't sin or give bad examples. They are men, after all. Men chose for a particular role, of course, but men nonetheless. Other people wonder how infallibility could exist if some popes disagree with others. This, too, shows an inaccurate understanding of infallibility, which applies only to solemn official teachings on faith and morals, not to disciplinary decisions or even to unofficial comments on faith and morals. So, if one pope were to give its opinion on, a certain topic that contradicts what a previous pope said, that does not violate the clause of infallibility, just to give an example there.
Yeah,
A pope's... Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to say it's interesting that you bring up this as the topic, especially after the recent what's the term, faux pas surrounding Pope Francis and his statements about all other religions.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because that was actually a result of a translation from error by a very radical left-leaning journalist who takes the word out of context. The problem with Pope Francis specifically is that he speaks in a way that is entirely clear in the service. It makes it very easy for bad actors to go in there and take his original words and twist it to mean something that it isn't. What he was referring to in that context is actually an older teaching of the church, which is the idea that, one, God is the truth, anything that's true comes from God, and two, all religions, while not the truth, do contain certain elements of the truth. For example, starting with Judaism, for example, probably the one we have the most in common with, where most history prior to Jesus is parallel because, again, as a reminder, the very first Christians were Jews, and they saw themselves as the fulfillment of Judaism, which is basically what Christianity is. The difference between us is the fact that they do not see Jesus as the Messiah, but they do agree on the other parts, so we try to use it to try and bring them into the faith. In a similar sense with Muslims, they do believe there is only one God and only one God. However, a lot of their teachings are kind of out of whack with teaching, but again, we try to cling onto the truth, point out what is true, and use it to bring them in. In a similar sense with the Buddhists, for example, they believe there's some kind of afterlife that people go to when they pass away. That part is true because you and I both know there is an afterlife. However, the way they interpret the afterlife is not entirely correct. And so we focus on the truth part, but use it to bring them to the fullness, the completeness of truth. And it's this exact level or degree of truthfulness that Pope Francis was referring to his statement. Not this assertion that, any religion will get you to heaven.
Yeah. Although I find it interesting because I actually watched a YouTuber called Metatron, and his native language is Italian. And according to him, the Pope meant what he said. It wasn't a mistranslation.
Well, I'm not familiar with this YouTuber. I'll have to check out his statement
I'll
in a
I'll
bit.
send I'll send you the video later.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, we'll probably circle back to that another day. But where was I? Oh, yes. Let me wrap. Yeah, there's a couple more points there, and then I'll be all set and stop it. Where was I? Oh, yeah. A Pope's private theological opinions are not infallible. Only when he solemnly defines is considered to be infallible teaching. Like, in other words, he'll have to make a clear, definitive declaration that this is the teaching of the church, and he has to make it like in the assembly of the congregation. If it's like I said, if he's just being interviewed and says something that sounds a little off or contradictory, that would not make it infallible. Let me make that clear there. Now, even fundamentalists and evangelicals who do not have these common misunderstandings often think infallibility means that popes are given some special grace that allows them to teach positively whatever truths need to be known. But that is not quite correct either. What infallibility does do is prevent a pope from solemnly and formally teaching as truth something that is in fact error. It does not help him know what is true, nor does it inspire him to teach what is true. Now, there's another section on Peter specifically. I'm going to get right to that. As a biblical example of papal fallibility, fundamentalists like to point to Peter's conduct at Antioch, where he refused to eat with Gentile Christians in order not to offend certain Jews from Palestine or the Palestinian regions. You might be familiar with this, Seth. It's in Galatians.
Yes, it does
Uh,
sound. I do seem to remember this.
right. For this, Paul rebuked him. Does this not demonstrate papal fallibility was non existent? Not at all. Peter's actions had to do with matters of discipline, not with issues of faith or morals. Furthermore, the problem with Peter's actions were his actions, not his teaching. Paul acknowledged that Peter very well knew the correct teaching, which means he knew what the right thing was. He just chose not to do it in that specific moment in time, which is the crux there. Fundamentalists must also acknowledge that Peter did have some kind of fallibility. They cannot deny that he wrote two infallible epistles of the New Testament while under protection against writing error. So, if his behavior at Antioch was not incompatible with this kind of fallibility, neither is bad behavior contrary to papal fallibility in general. Turning to history, critics of the church cite certain, quote, errors of the popes, quote unquote. Their argument is really reduced to three causes: those of Popes Liberius, Vigilius, and Honorius, the three causes to which all opponents of papal infallibility turn, because they are the only cases that do not collapse as soon as they are mentioned. There is no point giving the details here, but it's enough to know that none of the cases meet the requirements outlined by the description of papal infallibility given at Vatican I. That's in Pastor Aeternius. That's a document from the Vatican I. The article doesn't go in depth on this part, I believe, but there's one last big section here, and then that wraps up this point. So let me get on to that. According to fundamentalist commentators, their best case lies with Pope Heronius. Oh, so it just kind of tied it. Never mind. All right, that's good. They say he specifically taught monothelitism. Monothelitism, that's a new one. A heresy that held that Christ had only one will, a divine one, not two wills, a divine and human one, as well as all Orthodox Christians hold. But that's not at all what Heronius did. Even a quick review of the records show he simply decided not to make a decision at all. As Ronald Knox explained, quote, to the best of his human wisdom, he thought the controversy ought to be left unsettled for the greater peace of the church. In fact, he was an inopportunist. We, wise after the event, say that he was wrong. But nobody, and I think, has ever claimed that the Pope is infallible in not defining doctrine, meaning he didn't define anything at all. So you can't really hold him to something he never said, which is kind of what some fundamentalists like to argue. Now, the rejection of papal infallibility by Bible Christians stems from their view of the church. They do not think Christ established a visible church, which means they do not believe in the hierarchy of bishops headed by the Pope. This is no place to give an elaborate demonstration of the establishment of a visible church, but it is simple enough to point out that the New Testament shows the apostles setting up, after their master's instructions, a visible organization, and that every Christian writer in the early centuries, in fact, nearly all Christians until the Reformation, fully recognized that Christ set up an ongoing organization that runs through this day. One example of this ancient belief comes to us from Ignatius of Antioch. In his 2nd century letter to the church in Samaria, he wrote, quote, whenever the bishop appears, Let the people be there. Just as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. This is from the letter to the Simonians 8:1. This is written in 110 AD. So this predates even the Great Schism by over 9 centuries. So this is very early on in history. And to further clarify, Ignatius of Antioch was the grand disciple of John. Like, he was the disciple of John's disciple, like his direct successor. Point to note there. Now, if Christ did set up such an organization, he must have provided for its continuation, for its easy identification. That is, it had to be visible so it could be found. And since he would be gone from earth, for some method by which he could preserve his teachings intact. All this was accomplished through the apostolic succession of bishops, and the preservation of the Christian message in its fullness was guaranteed through the gift of infallibility of the Church as a whole, but mainly through its Christ-appointed leaders, the bishops as a whole, and the Pope as an individual, the Pope being the head of the College of the Bishops. It is the Holy Spirit who prevents the Pope from officially teaching error, and this charism follows necessarily from the existence of the Church itself. If, as Christ promised, the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church, then it must be protected from fundamentally falling into error and thus away from Christ. It must prove itself to be a perfectly steady guide in matters pertaining to salvation. Of course, infallibility does not include a guarantee that any particular pope won't neglect to teach the truth, or that he will be sinless, or that merely disciplinary decisions will be intelligently made. It would be nice if he were omniscient or impeccable, but his not being so will fail to bring about the destruction of the Church. Meaning that the Pope has a less than perfect character, that does not tarnish the credibility of the Church. And, there have been a couple bad popes throughout the history, but in spite of that, the Church still stands. Side note there. Oh, here we go. But he must be able to teach rightly, since instruction for the sake of salvation is a primary function of the Church. For men to be saved, they must know what is to be believed. They must have a perfectly steady rock to build upon and to trust as a source of solemn Christian teaching. And that's why Papal Infallibility exists. Since Christ said the gates of hell will not prevail against his Church, and I want to stress it right there, his Church, this means that his Church can never pass out of existence. But if the Church ever apostatized by teaching heresy, then it would cease to exist, because it would cease to be Jesus' Church. Thus, the Church cannot teach heresy, meaning that anything it only defines for the faithful to believe is true. And it's often said that what the Church believes is emblematic of what God believes, and that's quoting the Catechism directly. Where was I? Here we go. The same reality is reflected in the Apostle Paul's statement that the Church is, quote, the pillar and foundation of the truth. If the Church is the foundation of religious truth in the world, then it is God's own spokesman. As Christ told his disciples, he who hears you hears me, and he who rejects you rejects me, and he who rejects me rejects him who sent me. And thus concludes my section on papal infallibility.
That was kind of a lot to grapple with there.
Yeah, I know it's a lot. The good thing is we do upload these episodes to YouTube, so if you're watching live, you're a bit lost, you can just go back, rewind, and watch as many times as you want. I did cover a lot in this, 20-something minutes?
24 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, but hopefully with all that covered, you ideally should have a much better understanding of what papal infallibility is and is not, and how it has guided the Church throughout the ages.
And as I understand it, it's been very rarely invoked by the Catholic Church in practice as well. It's not something that's used lightly.
Exactly. Part of the reason I wanted to bring this up was the Pope Francis comments we discussed earlier, whether or not they were private. And based on what my understanding, it does seem more like a private comment because it was an interview, a one-on-one interview. So maybe it's just a private little thing. But also because, again, there are a lot of Christians out there who don't really know what infallibility is, which is why I wanted to bring it to the forefront. In fact, that's what I've been doing a lot recently, is mainly just clearing up misconceptions about the Catholic Church and what we Catholics believe, because that is a serious problem and one of the many obstacles preventing the Church to be one. Going back to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had prayed that we would all be one, and the fact is, we're not one. And one of my top goals, not just for the show, but also life in general, is to hopefully bring about the reunification of the Church before the end of times.
That would be beautiful if that did happen.
Yeah, it absolutely would. Now, earlier I did mention St. Augustine in my talk as he had a part on there. But we have a book on St. Augustine, do we not?
Um, Augustine, yes.
Oh, right. Augustine and Augustine, I say it either way, but let's get the ball rolling, shall we?
Yes. Um, I don't remember where I left off exactly. I earmarked the page, but I can't figure out where specifically. So I'm just going to go to the previous page and start at the bottom of the previous page and start to there. Prior to Augustine, and perhaps exerting an influence on him, were several Neoplatonic thinking Christians who speculated about the pre-existence of the soul. They thought of the soul as existing as a bodiless spirit before its incarnation or incarceration is in a physical body, which came about as a result of the fall. Along this line of thinking, the physical world and the human body were created as a penalty for sins, a training ground for exercise and virtue, in order to enable souls to return to a pure spiritual state. Thus chastened, they would be wiser for their experience. We find this view held by Marius Victorinus, a philosopher and teacher of rhetoric, whose conversion Augustine recounts in the Confessions. Uh, Victorinus wrote the first Latin commentaries on St. Paul, which Augustine may have read. In his comments on Ephesians 1:4, just as he chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world, Victorinus suggests that all souls pre-existed in Christ before the world had been created. So it's not out of the question that Augustine may have held the same view, or at least entertained it as a serious suggestion. Indeed, a number of passages in the Confessions hint at speculations in this direction. Tell me, God, did my infancy follow upon some other age of mine now dead, or is it merely the one I passed in my mother's womb? Have I received reports about that age, and I myself have seen a pregnant woman? Was there something before this age as well, my sweetness, my God? Was I anywhere or anything? For I have no one who could tell me such things. Neither my father nor mother were able, nor was the experience of others and my own memory any help. You're not laughing at me, are you, when I'm asking these things? Where does any living creature such as this come from, if not from you, Lord? Confessions 1 9 through 10. Even if this strikes us as bizarre and novel notion for a Christian, there is something profound in raising this question of where we were before this life. Not knowing where we come from in the fullest sense of the term, we are forced to acknowledge that our existence is grounded in a mystery. This mystery is ultimately unfathomable, no matter how much science unravels the process of our beginnings, reduces us to an egg and sperm, if you like, and to the DNA in the term. But what comes before that, and before that, and so on to infinity? What's more, how we work on a biological level does not tell us why we exist or what our purpose is. That is a question of a different order and requires its own mode of discourse. Augustine argues here that our very existence is something given to us in such a manner that a giver beyond our physical parents must be assumed. He points out that even the means by which we are nourished, and the fact that we are instinctively know how to take that nourishment, are given. Call it nature, call it instinct, call it what you will, but look at it in light of the mystery that Augustine sees revealed in these everyday things. These everyday things conceal the riches of the giver, God, at their base. This kind of vision is for those whose eyes have been spiritually opened. Only then can we see what is not apparent to the naked eye, which sees only the outside of things. In order to really see, says Augustine, we need faith. Among the givens Augustine believes we get from God is a basic orientation to the life of the senses. Oh, Oh man, please excuse me. I'm suffering from a bit of nausea here.
Oh, you all right? Did you need medicine or something?
No, I've been feeling woozy all day, ever since around like noon. I almost didn't show up to Branch Brothers today, but I'm trying to power through it. Um, the sensory knowledge is clearly related to our ability to survive. As an infant, Augustine remarks he already knew the goods and evils of the bodily comforts and discomforts. He will never deny that that these are real goods and real evils. But there are other goods besides the goods of the senses. There are the goods of the spirit. The big question for human beings is whether we rank the goods and evils of the senses in the proper order among all the goods. One further point in Augustine's discussion of infants indicates his sharply observant eye. He notes that an infant's sense of humor develops before speech does. Later, I began to also laugh. Later, I began also to laugh, first while sleeping and then while awake. This fact about myself was reported to me, and I believed it, since we see the like in infants other than ourselves. For I don't recall this part of my life, and look, gradually I came to an awareness of where I was, and I wanted to make my desires known to those by whom they could be fulfilled. But I was incapable of doing this because my desires were inside, but those people were outside, and they didn't have the capacity in any of their senses to enter into my soul. So I tossed around both limbs and noises and signs similar to my desires, the few signs I could make, not that they bore any true similarity. And when I was not obeyed, whether because I was not understood or because it would have been harmful, I became indignant with the grown ups who were not subservient to me, even with the free people who would not serve me, and I avenged myself upon them by howling. I have learned that all babies whom I have been able to learn from are like this. That I was also like this. The babies themselves are unknowingly reported to me better than my nurses who did know of me. Confessions 1:8. Here's the paradox of human existence. As Augustine has formulated it, babies struggle to survive by all means necessary. Their general helplessness makes them often angry and causes them to act in ways that adults would regard as unjustifiable, except for their ignorance. But their weakness is not for Augustine a good reason to consider them free of guilt. It is their weakness it is the weakness of infants, limbs that make them harmless or innocent, as the Latin could just as well be translated, not their intention. This was another thing that Augustine learned from babies he observed. I myself have seen and had experience of a jealous child, still without speech, he pale with anger, look upon his fellow nursling with a bitter face. This cannot be called innocence, this unwillingness to share an abundant flow of milk with another child who would surely die without it. Mothers and nurses, Augustine notes, claim to know how to wean out such tendencies by some mysterious remedies, but the tendencies which themselves can hardly be overlooked or called slight are tolerated only because they are designed to vanish with age. These observations concerning childhood seem to have fed into Augustine's question about whether we in any sense existed before our birth. His observations on the nascent 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 evils of the childish mind fit with what he read in parts of the Bible, for it contains sayings from which he would later formulate his understandings of the doctrine of original sin. Augustine's thoughts on the subject were of vital importance to the development of the Protestant theology. Reformation theologians like Luther and Calvin followed Augustine's lead in regarding the fallen nature of humankind as a signal reason as a single, no, signal reason why God's grace not only forgives, but heals and rehabilitates us from the damage all humanity incurred by reason of the first sin. Because if I was conceived in iniquity, and my mother nourished me in sins in her womb, see PS 51:5, where or when, O Lord, was I your servant ever innocent? But look, I'll pass over that time. How can a time I have no memory of concern me now? Confessions 1:12. Augustine moves to describe his growth from infancy to boyhood, and particularly his early experiences. He observes that speech, the most important skill, did not need to be taught, for the grown ups did not teach me by setting out words in a certain order of instruction, as was the case shortly thereafter with reading. Rather, I myself, by the mind you gave me, O God, my God, with grunts, various noises, and various motions of my limbs, I would seek to bring out the thoughts of my heart in order that my desires would be obeyed. That learning which seemed to come by itself, Augustine contrasts with what took place at school, sent there by adults, that I might be successful in this world and excel in skillful speech to get honor among people and riches that deceive those who chase after them. He was threatened with corporal punishment if he did not devote himself to his studies. It was fear of the rod that first brought little Augustine to prayer. I'm going to take a break really quick to turn on the lights.
Wait.
Sorry about that, folks.
I was about to say, you didn't have the lights on the whole time?
Yeah.
Are you just preaching in the dark?
Yes. I the My room doesn't, it's funny. My room doesn't get much sunlight. Typically I turn the lights on as soon as I wake up in the morning, but today I'm like, no, I'm just going to go right to church. Forgo the lights, forgo eating breakfast. I ate on the way to church instead. It's like, yeah. Yes. For as a boy I began to pray to you, my help, my refuge. I was untying the knots of my tongue, and as a little boy I prayed to you with no little emotion that I would not be beaten in school. And when you did not heed me, those blows, that great evil which weighed heavily upon me, then were laughed at by the grown-ups, even by my parents themselves, who did not wish any evil to happen to me. Could there be anyone who, by sticking to you so reverently, would be so great-minded that he would reckon racks, hooks, and other similar instruments of torture to be no big deal? To escape such things, the people beseech you with great fear throughout the whole world. We neither feared our punishments less nor prayed less to avoid them, and yet we were sinning by not writing, reading, or learning our letters as much as was demanded of us. There was no lack, O Lord, of mercy or brain power, which you wanted us to have sufficiently for our age, but it delighted us to play, and this was avenged upon us by those who were certainly doing such things themselves. But the games of adults are called business. Confessions 1:14-15.
Sorry, that last part was just hilarious. How it's like this is just playing for adults.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Despite his fears of being beaten, Augustine admits to having shirked his studies due to his love of play. Looking back, he finds it ironic that children are punished for their love of playing when those who punish them delight in their own kinds of play just as much. How different from a child angry at losing a ball game was a professor hot under the collar at a colleague who had gotten the better of him regarding some Picayune point. I have never seen that word before in my life. Picayune. Let's look it up real quick.
Honestly, kind of sounds like a guy who lost a debate or
Eh.
is losing a debate, shall we say? Yeah, if you think about it, there really is a difference between a kid losing a ball, game over losing a ball, and a guy game over losing a debate. On that sense, the
Well,
only difference is just the maturity level, or more accurately, the expected maturity level at the age. Like, no one's gonna get mad at a kid for getting mad over losing a ball, but if you can't handle losing a debate, that says a lot about your character.
I see nothing that adds clarity to this word and its use in this book. Um, Picayune is Spanish for coin, and there is a Picayune, Mississippi, but I suspect neither are related to the use of the word in this book.
I mean, is it quoted from Augustine directly? That passage you read?
Um, the passage from Confessions, yes, but Picayune is not directly taken from him.
Ah, interesting.
Augustine's criticism of his schooling and certain features of the adults who set the program tell us early on that his book consists more than just confessions of a sin and praise to God. The Confessions contains criticisms of all the human institutions that accomplish what we would call socialization. He critiques the educational curriculum of the day because the literature which formed its basis taught quite different lessons than the schoolmasters and parents intended. Great literature contains all sorts of characters, not all of them salubrious. But Augustine was worried about the moral effect of literature. Moreover, the element of fear was never absent. The teacher's rod was always there to back up the demand for diligence in studying. At home, chaste conduct was taught by Augustine's mother, and no doubt by other mothers as well, backed up with threats of all sorts. But woe unto you, O river of human custom, who can resist you? How long will you continue to run? How long will you tumble Eve's children into the huge and fearsome ocean, which those who embark on the wood of the cross barely cross over? Didn't I read in you of Zeus both thundering in judgment and committing adultery? Clearly he could not consistently do both of these, yet it was written so that real adultery could have an authority to intimidate, while the other fake thundering plays the pimp. But which of our robed professors can breathe easily when he hears of one of his chalk dusted fellows saying this out loud? Homer made these things up and ascribed human qualities to the gods, though I would prefer he had ascribed divine qualities to humans. But one would more truly say that poet did indeed make these things up, but he did so in order that crimes not be considered crimes through his associating divinities with human beings and their criminal deeds. The result is that anyone who had done these things would seem to be an imitator not of people lost in error, but of the heavenly gods. Confessions 1:25. Yeah, if you the more you study Greek myth, and the more you learn that the Greeks perceived the gods to basically be humans with otherworldly power, and just as fallible as us too.
Hmm.
Augustine rejects the argument that this racy literature is necessary for students to read for the sake of expanding their vocabulary. No way are these kinds of words learned more easily by means of their filthy context. Rather, it is this kind of filth perpet- perpetrated more confidently by means of these words. And here again, the fault belongs with the teachers who refuse to acknowledge their double standard. It's not the words I am bringing charges against. They are like choice and expensive vessels. Rather, it's against the wine of error which is served in them to us by the drunken teachers. And unless we drank, we were beaten, and no appeal was permitted to any sober judge. Augustine, following this manner of biblical prophets, Augustine uses the words wine and drunken to describe the senseless conduct of people who are otherwise quite sober. Augustine's criticisms of his schooling, of course, come from the mouth of one who excelled in schools beyond most of his peers. It's as if the captain of a high school football team who went on to college on a football scholarship were learning the role of sports in public education. Rarely do people criticize the thing through which they got their name and fame and money. Yet this is what our changed person is doing in the Confessions. Augustine tells us that he was selected by his grammar teacher to perform an exercise that was an important part of learning the language arts. This exercise involved taking a passage of poetry, rephrasing it in prose, and pronouncing it aloud with feeling and appropriate gestures. In this case, his teacher set him the task of doing this exercise with a portion of Virgil's Aeneid. Oh, bear with me, folks. In Aeneid, spelled Aeneid, where the queen of the gods, Juno, rages because she is not permitted to deny Aeneas a safe landing in Italy. Augustine describes that task as a matter of anxiety for his soul, something done under the promised reward of praise or in fear of shame and blows. At the time, he may have felt special honored, singled out even, if he did experience anxiety about performing well enough to make his parents proud. But when, as a bishop, he looks back on this event, his feelings are quite different. He shows a critical and discerning spirit, one unwilling to accept human convention and the easy, that's just the way it's always been done, rationale. Lazy Aeneid. Ah, thank you. Leave it to the chat to help me unbutcher my pronunciations. Um, what is going on
Yes.
here? I, the queen of the gods, am unable to prevent this Trojan king from landing in Italy to set up a new kingdom. The fates won't permit me to prevent it, they say. What's up with that? Didn't Athena get to vent her rage against the Greeks and sink their ships just because of the crimes of one of their soldiers, Big Ajax? And I can't do anything against Aeneas? This world is topsy-turvy, not to be endured. Virgil, Aeneid, 138. But what was the point of this, oh my God, my true life? Why the cries of approval to me when I recited this in the presence of my peers and fellow students? Look, wasn't this all smoke and wind, so there wasn't anything else on which my mind and tongue could have ever been exercised? Your praises, O Lord, your praises found throughout your scriptures, would have upheld my tender growing heart, so it would not have been uprooted by empty trifles as filthy plunder for flying creatures. For it is not just in one way that sacrifice is made to the fallen angels. Confessions 1:27. Augustine finds fault with both the substance and the style of his schooling, even if it was a ticket to successful career. Augustine is engaging in social criticism from a theological perspective. The pattern of sinful, wayward life is not just an individual thing, not just a path we choose to embark on of our own. Rather, Augustine wants to show us that human society as a whole, precisely through its approved institutions, casts the children into a river of human custom, and then becomes worried hypocritically when the children show all the corruption of the adult ways. Now, what wonder was it that I was carried off thus into meaningless things, and was going far off from you, my God? When the men set out to him as role models were more upset by grammatical mistakes than they were by their own rotten deeds. Let us not think, however, that Augustine is criticizing only pagan society. In a revealing incident about a time in his childhood when he became deathly ill, he shows us that Christians too perpetuate customs that are in tension with religious truth. This little story of his sickness is very important for establishing that Augustine was brought up as a Christian and had a conscious identification with that faith. While still a boy, I had heard about the eternal life promised to us through the lowliness of our Lord God, who came down to meet our haughtiness, and I who was marked with the sign of the cross and seasoned with salt at the moment I came from my mother's womb, who put much hope in you. You saw, O Lord, that although I was still a boy, becoming feverish on a certain day with a stomach pain, and about to die, you saw, O my God, since you were there, since you were already my guardian, with what emotion and with what faith I demanded the baptism of your Christ from the devotion of my mother, and that the mother of us all, your church. Confessions 1:17. We now come to the 52-minute mark of our stream. I had hoped to have finished chapter 1, but we would still need to reach page 41, and we are only on page 32. So the end of chapter 1 shall come next week.
Okay.
I will earmark the book, and we shall roll into worship.
All right, cool. See you guys there.
There we are. All right, now let's open the worship folder and get the display ready. I had these alphabetized. B, here we go. Let's start with earthen vessels. Start from first slide. Hold up a second. I'm sorry, chat. Let me adjust the volume so this is more audible. We hold a treasure not made of gold, in earthen vessels wealth untold. One treasure only, the Lord, the Christ, in earthen vessels. Light has shone in our darkness, God has shone in our hearts, with the light of the glory of Jesus the Lord. We hold a treasure not made of gold, in earthen vessels wealth untold. One treasure only, Alright, for our next song, we shall do Gather Us In. Here in this place, new light is streaming. Now is the darkness vanished away. See in this space our fears and our dreamings, brought here to you in the light of this day. Gather us in, the lost and forsaken. Gather us in, the blind and the lame. Call to us now, and we shall awaken. We shall arise at the sound of our name. We are the young, our lives are a mystery. We are the old who yearn for your face. We have been sung throughout all of history, called to be light to the whole human race. Gather us in, the rich and the haughty. Gather us in, the proud and the strong. Give us a heart so meek and so lowly. Give us the courage to enter the song. Here we will take the wine and the water. Here we will take the bread of new birth. Here you shall call your sons and your daughters. Call us anew to be salt for the earth. Give us to drink the wine of compassion. Give us to eat the bread that is you. Nourish us well and teach us to fashion lives that are holy and hearts that are true. Not in the dark of buildings confining, not in some heaven light years away, but here in this place the new light is shining. Now is the kingdom, now is the day. Gather us in and hold us forever. Gather us in and make us your own. Gather us in, all peoples together. Fire of love in our flesh and our bones. Fire of love in our flesh and our bones. And now we shall do our our third song of the day. We shall do Not Alone. Some days I barely hold on. When life drags me down, I wanna let go. But when my spirit is weak, you come to my aid and strengthen my soul. I'm lost without you, I'll never doubt you. Your grace is beyond compare. And though when it rains it pours, You know all I have is yours. You smile when you hear my prayer. You rescued me, and I believe that God is love, and He is all I need from this day forth for all eternity. I'll never wander on my own, for I am yours until you call me home. I close my eyes and I can hear you say, you're not alone. Oh, you're not alone. Oh, some days I just can't go on. I stumble and fall, I hang my head. You reach out for my hand, and you lift me up again and again. Oh yes, you do. I'm lost without you. I'll never doubt you. Your grace is beyond compare. And though when it rains it pours, you know all I have is yours. You smile when you hear my prayer. You rescued me, and I believe that God is love, and He is all I need from this day forth for all eternity. I'll never wander on my own, for I am yours until you call me home. I close my eyes and I can hear you say, you're not alone. Oh, you're not alone. Oh, in the face of my depravity, for God so loved the world, He died for me, yeah. My fire burns till He returns and takes me home beyond the galaxy. You rescued me, and I believe that God is love, and He is all I need from this day forth for all eternity, all eternity. I'll never wander on my own, for I am yours until you call me home. I close my eyes and I can hear you say, you're not alone. Oh, you're not alone. Oh, you're not alone. Never alone. Alright, next we're going to do a song we haven't done in a while. We will do Holy Now. Now, if you haven't heard this song before, you might scratch your head at some of the lyrics, but the idea behind this song is this is a reminder that everything in the world will be redeemed when Christ returns. There's this Gnostic tendency in some circles of Christianity to believe that the world is broken beyond repair, but no. We serve a God who plans to redeem all things in the end. Not just mankind, but the world we inhabit. When I was a boy each week, Sunday we would go to church, pay attention to the priest. He would teach the holy word and consecrate the holy bread. Everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything, everything, everything is holy now. When I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two. Jesus made the water wine. I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything, everything, everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding that there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, it barely wet my fingertips. Now I have to hold my breath, like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. But now I walk in with reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. Everything. Questioning child's face and say it's not a testament. That'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come and say it's not a sacrament. I tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and screaming like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head, and I remember when the church let out, how things have changed since then, 'cause everything is holy now. Used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-downs. Now I'm walking with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. And that brings us to the end of worship. I will close us in prayer, and then we will break and return with the To Be Continued podcast. Holy and merciful Father, you are altogether wonderful, and we know that this world will be redeemed. It's just a matter of time and faith. We long for the day when you return and make all things right again. What a joyous day that will be. It is an honor to share you with those around us and prepare the world for such a time. In your holy name I pray. Amen. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I will be back with the To Be Continued podcast in, let's say, at 7 o'clock, so 43 minutes. I hope to see you there. We're going to find somebody to raid. Our raid message is going to be, God be with you. Who do we know that's live? But let's raid Chris. It's been a while. We're counting down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Raiding now.
Let's go exploring in the Accord from Honda, KBB.com's 2024 Best Value Brand.